So that's a dandelion, these are thistles, and over here we have a whole bunch of clover. And this is a dead dandelion, and this is dead clover and a dead thistle. Do you also have these weeds and want to know how to get rid of them? In this video I'm gonna show you how you can do it in just a day or two with no herbicides at all. Hey everyone, my name is Sam and I'm an average Joe lawn nut. So I think most of you are familiar with these kinds of weeds. So today I'm gonna show you how you can get rid of them without using any kind of herbicides at all. So why not use herbicides? Well, in some countries like Sweden, you can't use it even if you want to. So in Sweden, you're not allowed to use any kind of herbicide at all. It's all illegal for homeowners to use. We can't even use glyphosate. That's all banned since 2022. And I think it's like that in most countries in Europe. So what I'm gonna use today is chelated iron. Is it chelated? Chelated? I think it's chelated, right? Chelated sounds like a made-up word. Is it chelated? No, I'm gonna go with chelated. So I'm gonna use chelated iron today. So I think most people use iron sulfate or have used it at some point, but chelated iron is a bit different. We'll get into why later in the video. First, let's just mix everything up and let's go spray some weeds. Here I have my chelated iron, and the chelating agent in this is DTPA. There are other chelating agents as well, but we'll get into it later in the video. And since this isn't sold for this purpose, so it doesn't really say how much I need to use for this, that's why I have two different bottles, both 1 liter. I'm gonna use this bottle and mix in 1 deciliter of the chelated iron and fill up the rest with water. And in this bottle, I'm gonna use a higher rate. I'm gonna use 2 deciliters of the chelated iron and the rest water, and we'll spray both of them and see how they do. And whenever you're mixing iron, have some cover, otherwise it will stain. It stains everything. And whenever you mix anything, it's always a good idea to wear gloves. It's only iron, but it's highly concentrated, so I just want to make sure I'm safe. All right, so for this bottle, I'm gonna just use 1 deciliter of iron. I'm pouring it into this one first, just because it's so hard to pour it in that small hole. So that's 1 deciliter in that one. And then we pour in 2 deciliters in this one. And then we fill up the rest with water. And we're ready to spray some weeds. Now all I need to figure out is how I'm gonna carry the camera, carry the 2 bottles, and not manage to stain anything. Sometimes you just don't think things through, right? Ah, well. It is what it is. All right, so I have my 2 bottles. Now let's go over to the neighbor's lawn and spray some weeds. I'm not using my own lawn because I don't really have any weeds. And I'm not saying that to annoy anyone. It's just a fact. I don't have any weeds in my lawn, so, and it's not like I have a magical lawn. It's just that as soon as I see a weed, I just pick that up. It's kind of satisfying to go around and pick weeds. But let's go over to the neighbors and let's spray some stuff. So here we are at the neighbors. As you can see, they have a lot of clover, a lot of thistles, 1 poor dandelion. So first off, in this area, I'm gonna spray on the low rate solution. You need to make sure you get good coverage. It needs to cover the entire weed. And then we're gonna go over to the left. We have a lot of clover here, some thistles, and then we're going to use the solution with the higher rate. Let's see if there's any difference. And on that poor little dandelion, I'm actually going to use the higher rate. Just make sure you actually cover everything. You need to have full coverage of the weed for this to work. So what should happen here is that the grass will only take up what it needs, while broadleaf weeds absorb the iron more easily and a lot more of it. So this will cause the weeds to dry up, turn black and die. So we'll get to this tomorrow and see how it does, if it made a dent or not. As you can see, they have a lot of it. So it's been about 48 hours since I sprayed the weeds with the chelated iron. I checked on it yesterday after 24 hours and it had already started going black. Everything was super dry. As soon as you touched it, it just fell apart. So it seems to be working pretty good, especially on the clover. On some of the thistles, it had worked great. they were all black and dry as well. On some of the thistles, I might have not gotten enough of the solution on there. It might have just blown off. I maybe didn't have 100% coverage, because it is important that you cover the entire weed. But as you can see from the footage yesterday, it's really effective and it works in about a day. And that was actually 24 hours later. I actually went and checked on it just a couple of hours after I sprayed it, and it had already started turning black. It wasn't as dry as it was 24 hours later, but the process had already started. It works pretty fast. So now it's been 48 hours. So let's go have a look and see how it looks now. And by the way, if you're enjoying this video and you're finding some value in it, it would help me out a lot if you can just press that like button and subscribe if you haven't. So here you have how it looks 48 hours after I applied the chelated iron. As you can see, it's pretty dead. I hope the camera can pick this up, but you can see that it's turning black and it's so dry. As soon as you touch it, it just falls apart like this. Now the thistles, on the other hand, you can see that they have dried up a bit. They're starting to turn black, but they're not completely dead. This one is pretty dead with the higher rate solution. So the thistles I sprayed with the lower rate solution, they're looking pretty okay actually. They started to blacken a bit, but they're not dead. And the thistles I sprayed with the higher rate, they're looking worse. Not 100% dead, but that might be because I didn't cover them properly, but they are actually starting to dry up. You can see it just starting to fall apart. Now, if the weeds are more established, you might need a second application. That's why it's a good idea to catch them as soon as they pop up, because as soon as they have time to establish, it's going to get harder to get rid of them. But most of this is just dead. I mean, look at this, it's working so well, super dry, falling apart. Now let's have a look at the dandelion. And here you have the dandelion I sprayed it with the higher rate solution. It's pretty dead. I mean, look at this, it's also drying up, crumbling. So all in all, I would say this has worked pretty well. Well, there you go. There wasn't much difference between day 1 and day 2. It just got more dry and died off more. So it seems to work pretty fast. Most of it happens just around day 1. And it's not only dandelions, clover and thistles you can remove with this. Now there's a whole list of different weeds you can use iron on. I'm using these 3 as an example because they are the most common ones here. And they are the only ones I could find actually. So check the list, and if you have issues with any of these kind of weeds, then chelated iron might be the solution for you, especially if you live in a country like Sweden where everything else is banned. And iron isn't toxic, so it's pretty safe to use. And after you spray it on the lawn, on the weeds, it's perfectly safe to walk on and use as soon as it dries up. And I'm saying as soon as it dries up, not because it's dangerous to let your pets go free in the lawn after you sprayed it with iron. It's just that it will stain them. And I think this is actually huge. I'm surprised it's not used more. There are some herbicides that are iron-based like Fiesta, but those are labeled as herbicides, so they are not allowed to be sold here in Sweden. You're not allowed to import them. So I'm actually kind of surprised there aren't any more products like this over here in Europe, especially since everything else is banned. I don't get it. Now let's talk a little bit about the difference between chelated iron and iron sulfate, which is more common. So the difference between iron sulfate and chelated iron is that iron sulfate isn't as stable, so it's not taken up by the plants as easily as chelated iron. And once it's taken up by the plants, it doesn't really move through the plant, while chelated iron moves through the plant more easily. Also, iron sulfate only works up to a pH of 7. So chelated iron is more soluble, it's more readily available for the plants, which means the plants can take in more of it. So that's why when you spray it on broadleaf weeds, they take in so much that it actually stops them breathing, so to say. So they will turn black and dry up and die. Meanwhile, your grass won't take any damage, since grass normally stops taking up iron after it's gotten what it needs. So if you use chelated iron, and especially if you use it with a surfactant, you increase how effective it is, because it becomes more effective with surfactant. And if you spray a lot, that might actually change the color of your grass, make it more gray blackish. Don't worry, the grass will come back. As soon as you mow it, it starts shooting up new leaves, so it will be fine. And one other benefit of the chelated iron is that you could actually use it to blanket spray your entire lawn. Then it will help with the broadleaf weeds, it will help with the chlorophyll production, and it will help against moss and make the grass more disease resistant. So it has all of the benefits of iron sulfate with the added benefit of actually being able to remove some weeds. But I assume iron sulfate is just cheaper to make. That's why you don't see chelated iron as much. The chelating agent in the iron I have is DTPA, but there are other types. I will put them up on the screen, but the difference is basically at which pH they are mostly effective. And the one found in Fiesta, for instance, that's the Fe Hetta, HEDTA. So the next question is, when are you supposed to use this? As with most fertilizers and iron sulfate and other stuff you feed your lawn with, you should use it when the weeds are actively growing, because then they take up the iron faster. Also, you should use it during spring or fall when the temperatures are a bit lower, and you can actually use iron pretty early in the spring. It might take longer for the iron to work because they're just waking up. It's not actively growing as fast as later in spring, but you can still use it at a lower temperature than most herbicides. You should not use it when it's over 26 degrees Celsius, so about 80 degrees Fahrenheit. And that's the same with all herbicides and fertilizers and everything, because at those temperatures, that's when the grass and everything goes dormant. It stops taking in everything, start protecting the roots. So of course you can't feed it a lot of iron. And you should also make sure it doesn't rain when you use it. It's not supposed to rain within 3 or 4 hours after the application, because it needs to sit on the plant and be absorbed. So if it rains within 3-4 hours, then you might need to reapply it, because then it will be washed away and the plant hasn't had the time to take up all the iron. And since it's not toxic and it doesn't damage anything, you can reapply it. And if you have tough weeds like thistles, if they're really established, then you might need to reapply it. Then I would reapply it, and after maybe 2, 3, 4 weeks, then you should be able to get rid of even tougher weeds. And for those of you who have seen my video where I tried to fix my in-laws lawn a year after, and it's still funny to say in-laws lawn. Such a nerd. Well, when trying to fix their lawn, they have so much clover. They have so much clover. It's more clover than it's actually grass. And I'm trying to fix it without having to start over. I mean, killing off everything and reseeding the entire thing. I just want to see if it can be done. About a year after now, their lawn is actually more leveled. It looks nicer, it has more grass, but the weeds are still everywhere. And since we are in Sweden, I really don't have anything to battle the weeds with. There are no herbicides. You can use culture practices, but it's gonna take you 10 years to get rid of the weeds. And I'm not sure you would get rid of them even after 10 years. So you need something to kind of speed up that process. And the chelated iron would be perfect for that. So later in the fall, I'm gonna give it another go. I'm gonna blanket spray the entire lawn and see if I can get rid of a lot of the weeds, and then plant new grass on it and outcompete the weeds pretty much. And if you continue the applications twice a year, I'm hoping that will help keep the weeds away. So I'm really excited to try that out. But there is one very major issue with chelated iron. It's that it is so hard to get a hold of. I mean, I've been reaching out to a lot of different suppliers. No one sells chelated iron. Everyone sells normal iron sulfate, but chelated iron is so hard and difficult to find. After months of emailing, searching, Googling, I found one company that actually sells it, in Sweden at least. But I am trying to find if there is anyone that can supply maybe a more affordable version for normal homeowners, because the only thing I could find was that 10-liter jug, and it wasn't cheap, I can tell you. So we'll see if I can manage, but outside of Sweden it seems to be easier, and I don't know why, because I mean, you could see that it works so well. And I mean, we do have weed issues in Sweden like anywhere else, and we do have bans on every kind of herbicide, so why not use iron instead? It's perfect. All right, that's it. Now you know how you can handle weeds without using any kind of herbicides. Now the only problem is going out and actually finding some chelated iron. If you don't live in Sweden, in other European countries or in the US, then it's easier to find. But if you do live in Sweden, I'll see if I can find anyone that is able to actually buy in some chelated iron for a reasonable price. If I do find it, I'll put a link to it, but it might take a while. But I'll put a link to it as soon as I can find someone. Otherwise, just start Googling. That's how I found this. And I know every time I talk about clover, I get comments that it's not a weed, it's very beneficial for bees and other insects, and I'm fully aware of that. I'm fine with that. Beyond my lawn, behind the deck, I have a lot of clover. I leave it be, I'm not killing it. They are perfectly fine to use all that clover over there, but for the 220 square meters of grass that I have, I don't want clover or dandelions in this area. I mean, that's just a fact. I don't want it in this area. All the other clover everywhere else, I'm not gonna kill it. It's fine. Use it as much as you want. I'll even plant some. I don't mind it. But for these 220 square meters, this is my space. I need it too. It's very beneficial for me. So I know, maybe you don't wanna kill the clover, maybe you like it, maybe you wanna spread it even more and even plant it. Go right ahead. But for those of you who don't, then get some chelated iron. All right, that's it for this video. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you in the next one.